Welcome to the Unveiled Epic Echoes channel. Today, we're diving deep into an unexplored historical mystery. Out in the wide, rolling plains of rural Texas, far from the hum of highways and the flicker of town lights, there stands an old, weather-beaten wooden barn. Its red paint long faded to a soft gray under the relentless sun, and the endless stretch of sky that seems to go on forever. A vast blue dome pressing down on the earth with quiet weight. And inside that barn live the animals, healthy cows with their glossy coats, strong horses that stand tall and calm, playful goats nibbling at hay, chickens scratching softly in the straw, all of them peaceful and silent as the day unfolds in its slow, familiar rhythm. The heat rising in waves from the dry ground outside, dust motes dancing lazily in the shafts of light that slip through the cracks in the boards, the air thick with the scent of hay and earth and warm animal breath. And every single day, right around the time when the sun hits its peak and the shadows grow short, something curious happens. The animals, one by one, turn their heads toward the same empty corner of the barn, that far northeast corner where nothing stands but bare wood and a pile of old straw. No feed trough, no gate, no shadow different from the rest, and they freeze there, unblinking, for hours, not a moo or a whinny or a cluck escaping them. Just that steady, collective gaze fixed on emptiness, while the cicadas drone outside and the wind whispers through the tall grasses. And I remember the first time I noticed it, sitting on an overturned bucket with a cold glass of sweet tea sweating in my hand, watching the herd because the ranch had been in my family for generations. And I'd come back after years away in the city to tend to it alone. The silence of the place settling into my bones like an old friend. And at first I thought maybe it was the light, or a trick of the heat making them drowsy in the same direction. But day after day, it happened at the exact same moment, as reliable as the sunset, and I began to document it quietly in a little notebook I kept in my shirt pocket, jotting down the time, the weather, the way their ears didn't twitch, their tails didn't swish, just that frozen attention toward nothing at all. No sound coming from that corner, no flicker of movement, nothing visibly wrong. Yet the unease started to creep in slow as evening shadows, a gentle prickling at the back of my neck, even as the warm breeze carried the smell of mesquite and wildflowers. And as the days turned into weeks, I noticed subtle changes. The cows would refuse their feed afterward, standing listless by the trough, as if their appetite had been drained away. The horses would paw the ground less eagerly. The goats wouldn't butt heads in play. And then came the morning when a new calf was born, slick and wobbly on its legs. And even before it took its first full breath, its little head turned toward that corner, eyes wide and staring just like the rest, as if it had been born knowing where to look. And that sent a quiet chill through me despite the rising heat of the day. The kind of chill that lingers under the skin while the sun bakes everything else. and I started walking the barn floor more often, feeling the creak of the old planks under my boots, the dust rising in soft clouds. And one evening, as the light slanted golden and low, I saw them, faint in the dust, forming perfect circles around that empty corner, circles within circles, like some silent ritual danced in the night when I was asleep in the farmhouse. And the prints weren't fresh enough to tell whose they were, cow or horse or goat, but they hadn't been there the day before, and the dust in the center of those circles looked disturbed, swirled gently, as if something unseen had been breathing there, slow and patient, stirring the air in rhythms too subtle to notice at first glance. And I recalled half-remembered stories from my grandfather, told in his low, gravelly voice on cool porch nights with crickets chirping all around. Tales of the land before the ranch was claimed. How this part of Texas had old histories buried deep, Comanche trails and Spanish land grants long disputed, whispers of sacred grounds or cursed spots where settlers built without asking permission from whatever had been here long before. And he mentioned once, almost in passing, that the barn's foundation stones came from an older structure, pulled up from a mound nearby that folks avoided, said to be an ancient place where the earth itself held memories, patient and aware, watching back through the ages. But he trailed off with a chuckle, calling it old superstition. Yet now, as I stood there in the hush of the barn, the animals still gazing motionless, I wondered if those stones under the floor carried something with them, something that waited in that corner, not angry or violent, just present, ancient and unhurried, drawing the eyes of every living thing that shared the space. And the dread grew little by little, not in screams or shadows lunging out, but in the repetition, the way the silence deepened each day, the insects seeming to buzz softer near that spot, the heat feeling heavier there, as if the air was thicker, and I found myself checking the corner more often, sweeping it clean only to find the dust disturbed again by morning, faint breaths, shaping patterns no wind could make. And the newborn calves kept coming, already starring, generation after generation learning the gaze before they learned to walk. And local folks I spoke to in town, over coffee at the feed store, with their slow drawls and sun-lined faces, shared fragments of folklore, half-forgotten claims about the land being wakeful, or listening, stories of old ranch hands who wouldn't enter certain barns after dusk. But no one said it plain, just hints wrapped in understatement, like the way the prairie wind carries secrets without ever shouting them. And as months passed in that isolated rhythm of dawn chores and evening quiet, the unease settled deeper into me, a companion as constant as the endless sky, making the vast openness feel strangely claustrophobic, as if the land was closing in with its watchful patience. And one twilight, after the animals had finally turned away and resumed their calm grazing, I stood alone in the barn, listening to the soft sounds of their breathing, feeling the coolness creep in as stars began to prick the sky outside. And I realized with a quiet, unsettling certainty that the corner wasn't empty at all, that something ancient occupied it, aware of me just as I was becoming aware of it, waiting with the same unblinking stillness. And the land itself seemed to hold its breath along with everything else. What do you notice first when you stand in that barn long enough, when the afternoon heat presses down and the silence stretches like a held breath? Does it feel like the animals are simply looking at something you cannot see? Or does it begin to feel as though something is looking back through them? Let us linger there with the narrator a little longer, in that quiet space where the dust hangs suspended in the slanted light, and ask ourselves, what happens to a person who watches the same strange ritual day after day, who records the same unchanging hour in a worn notebook, who begins to anticipate the exact moment when every head turns in perfect unison toward that bare corner? Can you imagine how it might feel when the evenings grow cooler and the crickets start their slow chorus outside? Yet inside the barn, the air remains thick and unmoving near that spot, as if the seasons themselves hesitate to cross its threshold. What thoughts might creep in when you sweep the floor clean at dawn, only to return at dusk and find those faint circular, freshly etched again? Always, always closer to the wall, as though whatever walks there is gradually drawing inward, patient as the turning of years. And when you lie awake in the old farmhouse at night, listening to the wind move across the prairie, do you begin to wonder whether the soft creak you hear is only the house settling, or whether something else is shifting its weight in the dark, testing the boards that separate it from you? Have you ever considered what it means to inherit land that remembers things you were never told, stones laid in the foundation that once formed a different shape on a different mound, stories half buried like roots beneath the soil, waiting for someone to stand still long enough to feel them stir? What might change in you slowly, almost imperceptibly, when the newborn calves no longer cry out at birth, but simply open their eyes and turn toward the corner, when the horses no longer nicker for feed, but stand in quiet attendance, when even the chickens cease their soft clucking and hold perfectly still? Could you sense the moment when your own gaze begins to drift in that direction without meaning to? When you catch yourself pausing mid-stride, notebook in hand, staring at empty air a little longer than before, and on the evening when the sun sets crimson behind the mesquite and the sky feels wider than ever, what quiet realization might settle over you as you stand alone among the animals, feeling the vast land all around, yet suddenly certain that you are not the one doing the watching anymore? Let that question rest gently with you. like the cool night air slipping through the barn doors, carrying the faint scent of dust and distant rain, inviting you to wonder what ancient, patient awareness might be waiting in the spaces we believe are empty. Watching back with the same unhurried stillness we offer the stars. What might happen, do you suppose, when the days begin to shorten and the first cool breaths of winter slip across the Texas plains, carrying the scent of distant cedar and dry leaves? Yet the barn remains strangely warm near that corner, as though something there holds the summer's heat long after it has faded everywhere else. Can you picture yourself standing at the threshold one frosty morning, coffee steaming in your hand, watching the animals file in from the pasture in their slow, unhurried way, and noticing that they no longer pause at the feed troughs at all, but move directly to their places, turning toward the emptiness with a kind of quiet eagerness that was not there before? What thoughts arise when you realize that the circular have stopped appearing overnight, yet the dust in the center of where they used to be now lies perfectly smooth, unnaturally so, as if no particle dares to settle there anymore? Have you ever wondered how it feels to walk the length of the barn alone after dark, lantern in hand, the flame flickering just a little less steadily as you approach that far wall, until the light seems to soften and spread, absorbed by something you cannot name, and when you catch your own reflection in the dark glass of a window, do you notice how your eyes linger a fraction longer in the direction of the corner, even when you try to force them away, as though some gentle current is guiding your gaze? What might it mean when the silence of the animals begins to feel less like stillness and more like listening, when their breathing synchronizes so perfectly that it becomes a single, slow rhythm echoing through the rafters? Could you sense the subtle shift on the night when the wind howls outside and rattles the tin roof? Yet inside the barn the air is utterly calm, not a straw stirring, not a tail flicking, and you find yourself holding your own breath without realizing it, matching their quiet cadence. What quiet dread might settle in your chest when you awaken before dawn and step outside to find frost glittering everywhere, except for a perfect, bare circle on the ground just beyond the barn door, directly in line with that unseen presence within? And in the deepening cold of December, when the stars burn sharper overhead and the vast sky feels closer than ever, what realization might dawn gently, inescapably, as you stand once more among the silent creatures and feel, for the first time, that you are no longer merely observing something ancient and patient, but have gradually, unknowingly, become part of its long, unhurried vigil? What might it reveal about the passage of time when January arrives on the plains, bringing those sharp northerlies that sweep down from the panhandle, carrying the dry scent of cedar and frozen earth, turning the breath of the animals into fleeting clouds in the dim barn light. Yet, that corner remains untouched by the frost that glitters everywhere else, as if the cold itself hesitates to approach. Can you envision the narrator stepping out at dawn, boots crunching on the thin layer of ice that has formed overnight on the stock tank? The vast sky a pale gray, promising perhaps a rare dusting of snow later in the day, only to find that the path leading to the barn door is marked by a single set of human footprints, his own from the evening before. Yet inside, the straw near the corner lies flattened in a wide, perfect oval, as though something large and heavy had rested there through the night. What subtle shift might occur in the animal's vigil when the shortest days come, their stairs no longer breaking at dusk, but continuing into the lantern-lit hours, eyes reflecting the flame without a single blink, until the narrator begins to wonder if they are still waiting for something to appear, or if they are now guarding against his own growing compulsion to approach. Have you considered how the old stories might deepen the unease, tales whispered by elders of ancient mounds on these plains? Places like the Medicine Mounds, far to the north, where Comanche seekers once climbed for visions, or the Caddo earthworks in the eastern woods, where spirits were said to linger in the soil, watching those who disturb the land without reverence. And whether the stones hauled long ago to build this barn's foundation carried more than mere weight from such a place. What quiet alarm might stir when a calf is born on a bitter January morning, steam rising from its wet coat in the frigid air, and it struggles to its feet only to freeze midway, head already turned toward the corner with the same unyielding gaze, as if the knowledge is passed not through blood, but through the very ground it stands upon. Could the dread intensify on those rare nights when a light snow falls silently across the plains, muffling the world outside, yet inside the barn the air grows inexplicably warmer near that spot, the snowflakes melting before they touch the threshold, leaving a bare semicircle of earth while the rest of the doorway whitens. And when the narrator, driven by months of mounting curiosity, finally places a chair in the barn one long winter evening and sits facing the corner himself, notebook forgotten in his lap, what might he begin to sense in the deepening silence? A faint rhythm, like the slowest of heartbeats echoing from the wood, or perhaps the gentlest exhalation stirring the dust in patterns that almost form eyes watching back. What realization might creep in as the hours pass, and the cold seeps through his coat everywhere except where he sits, close enough now to feel that patient warmth, understanding at last that the vigil is not merely observed by the animals, but shared, and that in watching so long, he has invited the ancient awareness to turn its timeless gaze upon him in return, binding him gently, inexorably, to the land's quiet, eternal watch. what might unfold as spring begins to soften the edges of the Texas plains, when the first green shoots push through the frost-hardened soil, and the northerlies give way to warmer winds carrying the faint promise of rain. Yet the barn's corner remains a pocket of lingering winter, the air there cooler and heavier than anywhere else, as if time itself moves more slowly in that space. Can you imagine the narrator venturing out one early March morning, the sky a vast pale canvas overhead, to find that the animals have begun to gather, not just at the appointed hour, but lingering longer into the evenings, their vigil extending as the days lengthen, eyes fixed with an intensity that now seems less like watching and more like communion. What subtle patterns might emerge when old family papers are unearthed from a dusty trunk in the farmhouse attic, yellowed land deeds from the 1880s mentioning stones from nearby Dolomite hills, hills once known to the Comanche as places of healing and spirit, where medicine men climbed to mix herbs under the watchful gaze of something ancient and benevolent, yet fiercely protective of the land's quiet secrets. Have you pondered how the unease deepens on those clear spring nights when the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance? And from the barn comes no sound at all, not even the soft shift of hooves on straw, as though the animals hold themselves in perfect suspension, breathing in unison with a rhythm older than the ranch itself, older perhaps than the plains that stretch endlessly around. And when a rare thunderstorm rolls in from the west, lightning flickering across the horizon like distant memories, what might the narrator feel standing in the barn doorway, watching rain sheet down everywhere except in a narrow band near that corner, where the dust remains dry and undisturbed, circled faintly by those persistent that now seem to spiral inward more tightly than ever? Could the growing dread take root deeper as local stories surface in quiet conversations at the county feed store, tales not of curses or vengeance, but of watchful presences in the land, spirits tied to sacred mounds scattered across these plains, from the medicine mounds where Comanche seekers still return for renewal, to forgotten cairns of stone dotting west central hills, places where the earth remembers those who honored it long before fences and barns divided the horizon. What quiet shift occurs within the narrator on the day he places an old lantern near the corner, its flame burning steady and unnaturally bright, casting no flickering shadows on the bare wall, while the animals stand arrayed in silent attendance, and he senses for the first time a gentle pull, an invitation to join the vigil, to turn his own gaze toward the emptiness that is not empty at all. And as bluebonnets begin to bloom across the prairie in waves of indigo under the strengthening sun, what profound, unsettling acceptance might settle over him, understanding that the ancient awareness in that corner patient guardian of disturbed stones, silent witness to the land's long memory, has not come to claim or punish, but simply to include him in its timeless watch, binding human and earth and creature in a shared, unblinking stillness that stretches back through centuries of forgotten truths. What might begin to stir within you as the summer heat returns to the Texas plains, when the cicadas resume their relentless chorus and the air shimmers above the dry earth. Yet the corner of the barn holds a lingering coolness, a subtle pocket of shade that defies the season's advance, as if the ancient presence there prefers the quiet of winter's memory. Can you sense how the narrator, now deeper into his solitary watch, uncovers more fragments of the land's hidden past? Perhaps an old survey map in the county records, hinting at dolomite stones from hills far to the north. Hills once revered by Comanche healers as places where spirits dwelled and medicinal herbs drew their power from the earth itself. Much like the medicine mounds that rise solitary on the horizon, sacred refuges where vision seekers climbed for renewal and communion with something timeless. What deeper unease might arise when the animals, on the hottest days, no longer seek the shade of the barn's walls, but cluster instinctively nearer to that cool corner, their breaths slow and measured, as though drawing sustenance from an unseen spring, while the narrator finds his own steps drawn thereto, unbidden, during the languid afternoons when the vast prairie seems to hold its own breath under the endless sky. Have you ever reflected on how the bluebonnets burst forth in wild profusion across the fields that spring, painting the landscape in waves of indigo that stretch to the horizon? Yet around the barn itself, a faint circle remains curiously bare, the soil there darker and richer, as if nourished by something deeper than rain, echoing the borrow pits of ancient caddo mounds, where basketfuls of earth were carried to build platforms for temples and burials long ago. And when a sudden summer thunderstorm brews on the western edge, dark clouds rolling in with distant thunder like the rumble of forgotten drums, what might the narrator feel as he shelters in the barn, watching the rain lash everywhere, but soften near that corner where the dust stirs gently in patterns reminiscent of ceremonial designs etched on pottery from ceremonial centers lost to time? Could the growing acceptance deepen on those evenings when fireflies begin to dance outside and the stars emerge sharp and numerous, prompting thoughts of how the caddo once believed their leaders ascended to the heavens upon death, becoming part of the night sky, watching eternally over the land that held their mounds, much as this patient awareness now seems to watch over the barn, not with malice, but with the unhurried guardianship of something that has witnessed centuries of comings and goings. What quiet transformation might occur as the narrator, lantern in hand, finally traces the faint outline in the dust of what could be an old foundation beneath the barn floor. Stones aligned in ways that whisper of older structures, perhaps displaced from a low rise on the property. A place where the earth remembers rituals and vigils far predating fences and plows. And in the fullness of that long, humid summer, as the prairie grasses sway golden under the relentless sun, what profound serenity mingled with dread might envelop him, realizing that the ancient occupant of the corner, guardian of disturbed earth, silent inheritor of sacred hills and mounds, has woven him gently into its eternal watch, where human, animal, and land share a stillness that transcends time, inviting not fear, but a deep, unspoken belonging to the vast, watchful plains. What might begin to reveal itself as autumn returns once more to the vast Texas plains, when the grasses turn golden and brittle under the slanting sun, and the wind carries the dry scent of mesquite and distant rain that rarely comes. Yet the corner of the barn holds an unchanging pocket of stillness, as if the seasons themselves circle around it without fully entering. Can you picture the narrator, now years into this solitary tending of the land, poring over faded county records and old survey maps in the quiet of the farmhouse lamplight, discovering references to dolomite outcrops on the property long ago for building stone reminiscent of the 4 conical hills far to the north in county, the medicine mounds revered by the Comanche as places of powerful spirits, where healers gathered herbs under the watchful benevolence of something ancient that directed hunts and guarded the people. What deeper layers of history might unfold when fragments of local lore, shared in hushed tones by old-timers at the feed store, speak not of Caddo earthen platforms in the distant piney woods, but of scattered, lesser-known cairns and low rises across the western plains, forgotten markers perhaps left by earlier peoples, or natural formations claimed by the Comanche as sacred, their springs and elevations drawing camps for vision quests and medicine gatherings, much like those dolomite mounds that rise abruptly from the flat horizon, believed to house a spirit that saw across endless miles. Have you ever wondered how the unease evolves when the animal's vigil grows ever more profound in the shortening days? Their gazes not merely fixed, but attuned, as though listening to a rhythm embedded in the very stones beneath the barn floor. Stones hauled perhaps from a low, unnamed rise on the ranch itself, a place where Comanche riders once paused to mix medicines, drawing power from the earth's quiet awareness, long before fences divided the prairie and barns claimed corners of the sky. And on those crisp fall evenings, when the stars emerge sharp and innumerable, evoking tales of Comanche beliefs in ancestors ascending to the heavens, what might the narrator sense as he stands among the silent herd, feeling the faint warmth persisting in that corner, despite the cooling air outside? understanding gradually that the presence is no intruder, but a guardian displaced, tied to disturbed dolomite, patient witness to the land's transitions from bison trails to cattle paths, from nomadic camps to settled ranches. Could the dread soften into a profound reverence on the day he traces an old buffalo trail in the pasture, faint but enduring, leading toward the barn, as if even the great herds once acknowledged this spot, circling it in respect, much like the that no longer appear, yet leave the dust eternally smoothed. What quiet communion might emerge as winter approaches again, the plains whitening briefly under rare frost, while the corner remains bare and dark-soiled, nourished from below, inviting the narrator to ponder whether the ancient awareness, rooted in the sacred hills of the Comanche, echoed in the enduring spirit of the land, has always been here, watching not with judgment, but with the timeless patience of the plains themselves, weaving human lives into its unhurried, eternal gaze. And in that deepening acceptance, as the cycle of seasons turns once more under the endless Texas sky, what insight might settle gently upon him, recognizing that the corner holds not emptiness, but the quiet heart of the land's memory, a sacred refuge displaced, yet enduring, binding past and present in shared, unblinking stillness. What might begin to dawn on the narrator as another cycle of seasons turns across the vast rolling plains, when the winter winds carry the faint, dry whisper of ancient buffalo trails long overgrown. Yet the corner of the barn holds its unchanging vigil. The air there, perpetually calm and faintly warmer, as though the dolomite stones beneath the floor still carry the memory of those four conical hills rising abruptly from the flat horizon far to the north in county, hills known to the Comanche as places where powerful spirits dwelled, directing hunts from their lofty vantage and infusing medicinal herbs with healing strength. Can you imagine how the weight of this history settles deeper when old ranch records and county surveys reveal that the barn's foundation stones were indeed from local dolomite outcrops, similar in composition to those sacred medicine mounds, hauled here in the late 1800s by settlers unaware or unconcerned that they were displacing fragments of a landscape revered for centuries as a spiritual refuge, where Comanche healers climbed to mix remedies under the watchful gaze of a benevolent presence that could see for miles across the endless plains what subtle harmony might emerge in the animal's behavior as spring returns once more. Their gaze is not rigid with fear, but softened into a profound attentiveness, drawing nourishment from the quiet energy embedded in those relocated stones. Much like the springs at the base of the real medicine mounds that provided water and healing plants for nomadic camps, campsites where vision quests and ceremonies honored the land's enduring spirit, Have you considered how the narrator, now attuned to these layers of forgotten truth, begins to feel less like an intruder on the land and more like a quiet participant in its long memory, understanding that the presence in the corner is no vengeful force, but a displaced guardian, patient and aware, much as the Comanche descendants today still seek permission to perform cedar smoke blessings and plant spirit sticks atop those distant mounds, maintaining a sacred connection despite the changes wrought by time. And on those clear evenings when the vast sky deepens to indigo and the first stars appear like ancestors watching over the plains, what gentle peace mingled with awe might envelop him as he stands among the silent creatures, sensing the ancient awareness weaving threads between past and present, between disturbed stone and living earth, inviting a shared stillness that honors the land's timeless, unhurried watch. What might gradually become clear as yet another year folds into the endless rhythm of the rolling plains, when the autumn winds carry the faint echo of ancient buffalo herds across the golden grasslands, and the 4 Dolomite mounds far to the north in county stand silent against the horizon, those natural formations rising abruptly from the flat expanse, their caps believed by the Comanche to house a powerful, benevolent spirit that watched over the people from its lofty vantage. Can you sense how the narrator, having traced the barn's foundation, stones back through faded deeds and local memory, comes to understand that they were likely from similar Dolomite outcrops scattered across these plains, erosional remnants of ancient seas, much like the medicine mounds themselves, where Comanche healers once climbed to gather herbs infused with spiritual power, placing offerings at the peaks, while springs at the base provided water for camps and ceremonies. What quiet profundity might emerge when the animals shared vigil feels less like compulsion and more like reverence, their stillness mirroring the unhurried guardianship that the Comanche attributed to the spirit atop the highest mound, a presence that directed hunts across vast distances, deflected harm, and offered healing to those who approached with respect. Have you reflected on how the land's history layers upon itself, with those displaced stones carrying forward a fragment of that sacred landscape, not in anger, but in patient continuity, much as Comanche descendants today still seek permission to perform cedar smoke blessings and plant spirit sticks upon the mounds, honoring a connection that endures despite the passage of fences, plows, and time. And on those crisp evenings, when the sunset paints the prairie in hues of amber and rose, casting long shadows from the old weather-beaten barn, what deep sense of belonging might settle over the narrator as he joins the silent assembly once more, recognizing that the awareness in the corner is no stranger, but a quiet steward of the plain's ancient memory, inviting him, the animals, and the land itself into a timeless communion under the vast, watchful Texas sky. what might gently unfold as the years continue to turn across these wide Texas plains, when the cycles of drought and rare abundance repeat like breaths in a long, slow sleep, and the old barn stands ever more weathered yet enduring, its corner holding that same quiet presence as the dolomite stones beneath settle deeper into the earth's memory. Can you feel how the narrator, now graying at the temples and moving with the unhurried gait of someone who has learned the land's patient tempo, no longer keeps a notebook, but simply knows the hour by the angle of sunlight on the horizon, by the way the wind shifts just before the animals turn in perfect unison toward the guardian that was never truly displaced? Have you ever wondered what it means to live alongside a reverence older than any deed or fence? To wake each dawn not with questions, but with quiet acknowledgement, understanding that the spirit once tied to distant conical mounds now rests content in this small corner of relocated stone, watching over the ranch with the same benevolence the Comanche once sought on those sacred hills. And when calves are born in spring pastures bright with wildflowers, rising to stand and gaze immediately toward the barn, not in fear, but in instinctive recognition, does it not suggest that the land itself teaches its inhabitants where the heart of its memory resides, passing the vigil gently from generation to generation? What deeper peace might settle as the narrator, on quiet evenings, sits on an old bench just inside the barn door, sharing the stillness with cow and horse and goat alike, feeling the faint warmth radiating from that corner like the memory of sun on dolomite long after dusk has cooled the rest of the world. Could there come a time when the boundary between watcher and watched softens entirely, when the vast sky above and the ancient awareness below feel like two sides of the same endless gaze, and the man who once returned to this isolated place seeking solitude discovers instead a profound, wordless belonging? And in the long turning of seasons under that immense Texas sky, what gentle truth might finally rest upon him that the corner was never empty, nor was he ever truly alone, but both have always been held in the patient, benevolent watch of the land itself, a sacred continuity as enduring as the plains that stretch unbroken to every horizon. What might happen when a new person arrives on this quiet stretch of the rolling plains? Someone unaccustomed to the vast silence and the slow turning of seasons under an endless sky, perhaps a distant relative who inherits a share of the ranch after the old narrator passes gently in his sleep one autumn night, leaving behind only a weathered journal filled with careful observations and no explanations at all. Can you imagine this newcomer, let us call her, driving down the long gravel road for the first time, dust rising behind her truck like a hesitant greeting, the barn appearing on the horizon as a solitary sentinel, its gray boards softened by decades of sun and wind, and how she might feel the land's watchful hush settle over her even before she steps out of the cab. Have you considered what questions might begin to form in her mind when, on her very first evening tending the animals, she notices every cow, horse, goat, and chicken turn in perfect unison toward that far northeast corner at the precise moment the sun balances on the western ridge, holding their gaze in complete, unblinking stillness for hours, while the cicadas outside continue their song undisturbed. And when she flips through the old journal left on the kitchen table, reading entries that span decades, simple notations of time, weather, the appearance of circular, the warmth that lingers near the corner in winter, the way newborn calves are born already knowing where to look, what curiosity might stir in her, tempered perhaps by the practical skepticism of someone raised far from these plains. What deeper inquiry might arise as she learns, slowly, from quiet conversations with neighboring ranchers, and from county records in the small courthouse 2 hours away, that this land was once part of the vast Comanche territory known as its rolling grasslands traversed by bands who followed the great bison herds, camping near springs and elevated places where medicine could be gathered and visions sought. Could she begin to piece together the significance of those dolomite foundation stones when an elderly Comanche woman, visiting the nearby medicine mounds for a private ceremony, mentions in passing that certain hills and outcrops across these plains were regarded as living relatives, places where the earth spirit could be consulted, where healers climbed to offer cedar smoke and receive guidance for the people's welfare. And on those long solitary nights, when the stars burn cold and bright above the barn, what gentle unease might mingle with wonder as finds herself drawn to sit on the same old bench just inside the door, watching the animals maintain their silent vigil, feeling the faint, inexplicable warmth radiating from that corner, like breath from something ancient and patient. What profound shift might gradually occur over months and seasons as she tends the land with growing respect, noticing how the bluebonnets bloom thick everywhere, except in a faint circle around the barn, how storms seem to part gently around that spot, how her own dreams begin to carry echoes of wide grasslands and distant conical hills rising from the horizon. Might there come a quiet evening, years into her stewardship, when closes the journal for the last time, not with fear, but with a deep, wordless understanding that the corner has never been empty, that the displaced guardian of sacred stone has simply waited for each new caretaker to learn the same timeless lesson, that the land remembers, watches, and when honored, quietly includes those who dwell upon it in its benevolent, eternal gaze. What might gently begin to change in, as the first full year of her stewardship unfolds across these wide rolling plains, when the spring rains come soft and steady, turning the grasslands a vivid green that waves like an endless sea under the vast sky. And she finds herself rising earlier each dawn, not out of duty alone, but drawn by the quiet rhythm the land seems to offer. Can you sense how her initial skepticism softens, little by little, as she watches the ritual repeat without fail? The precise moment when every animal turns toward that northeast corner, holding their gaze in serene stillness, and how she begins to time her own chores around it, almost without noticing, as though the hour itself has become sacred. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to read the old narrator's journal not once, but many times, tracing his careful handwriting across decades, seeing how his questions gradually gave way to quiet observations, then to acceptance, and to recognize, slowly, the same shift beginning within yourself? And when she drives the long road to one crisp afternoon and stands at last before the real medicine mounds themselves, those 4 Dolomite hills rising solitary from the flat horizon, their peaks capped with cedar and scrub, the wind whispering through the grass, what deeper resonance might stir in her as she learns from a local historian that Comanche people still return here quietly, leaving small offerings of cedar smoke and prayer, honoring a spirit believed to dwell within the highest mound, a guardian who once watched over hunts and healed the sick with guidance carried on the wind. Could the connection deepen on the evening she returns home, dust on her boots and the scent of distant cedar still clinging to her jacket, and finds a newborn calf already standing in the pasture, its small head turned not toward its mother, but directly toward the barn's hidden corner, as if the land itself passes knowledge deeper than instinct. What quiet curiosity might prompt her, months later, to kneel one morning and brush away the straw near the foundation stones, revealing the pale gray dolomite veined just like the samples she saw at the mounds. Stone that once formed part of a landscape considered living, breathing, aware by those who moved across these plains long before any ranch was dreamed. And as another autumn paints the grasses gold and the nights grow longer, what gentle realization might settle over as she sits on the old bench in the barn's soft lantern light, surrounded by the silent, attentive animals, understanding, without need for words, that she has not inherited merely land and livestock, but a quiet invitation to join a vigil far older than fences or deeds, a shared watch kept by earth and creature and human alike under the immense, eternal Texas sky. What might begin to stir in streams as the winters and summers blend into one another on these endless rolling plains, when the night sky fills with so many stars that it feels as though the veil between earth and heaven thins, and she wakes with faint memories of standing atop a high Dolomite hill, cedar smoke curling around her, the wind carrying whispers of guidance across vast grasslands where bison once thundered. Can you imagine how those dreams might grow clearer over time? Not frightening, but strangely comforting, as though something ancient is patiently teaching her the language of the land, the way the wind shifts before rain, the precise hour when the light turns golden on the barn walls, the subtle warmth that lingers near the corner, even on the coldest December mornings. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to stop asking, why one day, and simply accept that the animal's vigil is not a mystery to be solved, but a rhythm to be joined, like the slow breathing of the prairie itself, older than any human story, yet willing to include those who listen long enough. And when, years into her life here, begins leaving small offerings of her own, a sprig of cedar gathered from the fence line, a quiet word of thanks spoken into the stillness of the barn at dawn, might she sense a gentle response in the way the air softens around her, in how the animals seem to relax more deeply into their watch, as though her respect has completed some long interrupted circle. Could there come a season when she realizes that the guardian spirit, once tied to distant sacred mounds, and now resting quietly in displaced stone, has never demanded anything, not fear, not worship, only acknowledgement, a simple recognition that this land was, and still is, alive with memory and awareness. What quiet joy might fill her on the evening she sits once more on the old bench, lantern unneeded in the soft twilight, and feels her own gaze drawn gently toward the corner alongside cow and horse and goat, not by force, but by an invitation as old as the plains themselves, an invitation to share in the patient, benevolent watch that has endured through Comanche camps, through settlers, plows, through generations of caretakers who learned, one by one, to belong. And in that shared stillness, as another cycle of seasons prepares to turn beneath the immense Texas sky, might finally understand that the corner has always held exactly what it was meant to hold. Not emptiness, not horror, but the quiet, enduring heart of the land, waiting patiently for each new keeper to hear its gentle, timeless greeting, what might unfold in its heart as the years stretch onward across these vast rolling plains, when the barn grows ever more silvered by sun and wind, and she finds herself speaking aloud to the stillness, not in fear or superstition, but in the quiet way one speaks to an old companion who has never once demanded words, yet always listens. Can you sense how the offerings become simpler over time? A handful of native grass laid gently near the foundation stones, a pause at dawn to feel the faint warmth rising from the dolomite, as though the earth itself exhales in greeting, a soft acknowledgement that the guardian displaced long ago has found a new resting place and chosen, in its patient way, to remain. Have you ever considered what it truly means to inherit not just land, but relationship, to stand in a lineage of caretakers who each, in their own season, learned to meet the land's gaze without flinching, discovering that the ancient awareness tied to sacred hills and healing springs asks nothing more than respect, and in return offers a profound sense of being held within something far larger than oneself. And when visitors come rarely, perhaps a curious historian or a neighboring rancher seeking advice on drought-resistant grass might notice how the animals shift ever so slightly, their vigil softening as if to shield the corner from unfamiliar eyes, reminding her gently that some truths are meant to be discovered slowly by those willing to stay long enough to listen. Could there come a quiet morning, decades into her life here, when wakes before dawn and walks to the barn without lantern or hurry, drawn by the same timeless rhythm that once guided Comanche healers to distant mounds, and stands among the silent creatures feeling not separation, but complete belonging, as though human, animal, stone, and sky have woven together into one long, unhurried breath. What gentle certainty might settle over her then, as another spring paints the plains with wildflowers, and the cycle turns once more, that the corner holds exactly what it has always held: the quiet, enduring presence of the land's memory, a benevolent guardian that watches not to judge, but to include, to remind every living thing that walks these grasslands that we are never truly alone beneath this immense and ancient sky. What might quietly begin to happen as hair turns silver like the weathered boards of the barn, and decades slip by in the slow, unbroken rhythm of the rolling plains, where each sunrise paints the grasslands in soft gold, and each night unfurls a canopy of stars so dense it feels as though the ancestors themselves are leaning close to listen. Can you imagine how the offerings evolve into something wordless and instinctive? A gentle touch to the dolomite stones at dawn, a pause to breathe with the animals during their daily vigil, a quiet planting of native grasses around the barn each spring, so that the circle of bare earth slowly softens, yet never quite disappears, as though the land itself chooses what to reveal and what to keep. Have you ever reflected on what it truly means to become a keeper of memory, to carry forward not just the care of cattle and horses, but the unspoken agreement between human and earth that began long before any of us arrived? An agreement renewed each time someone chooses to stay, to listen, and to honor what was here first. And when young people come now, and then perhaps a great niece or nephew visiting for a summer, wide-eyed at the vastness and the silence, might watch with gentle amusement as they notice the animals' strange ritual, ask their eager questions, and then, over weeks, grow quieter themselves, their gazes lingering longer toward the corner, until they too feel the pull of something patient and kind waiting there. Could there come a season when, walking slower now, but still steady, realizes that the guardian spirit has never been confined to the corner alone, that it lives also in the wind that moves across the grasslands, in the springs that still bubble faintly after rare rains, in the very Dolomite hills far to the north that continue to watch over the plains as they always have. What profound gratitude might fill her on the quiet evening when she sits once more on the worn bench, the lantern long unnecessary because she knows every shadow by heart, and feels the warmth rise not just from the stones, but from the earth itself, like a slow heartbeat syncing with her own, with the animals, with the endless turning of seasons under this ancient sky, and in the gentle deepening of age, as another cycle prepares to pass the land to yet another caretaker, might finally rest in the deepest truth of all, that the vigil was never about watching something unseen in an empty corner, but about learning to see what has always been here, the living, benevolent presence of the land itself, patiently holding every story, every life, every quiet breath in its timeless, unwavering embrace. What might gently emerge as days grow fewer on this vast stretch of the rolling plains, when her steps slow to match the unhurried pace of the wind across the grasslands, and she finds herself spending more and more time simply sitting in the barn's soft light, surrounded by animals whose descendants have known this vigil longer than any human memory now living. Can you sense how the boundary between caretaker and cared for begins to dissolve entirely, as though the guardian spirit, rooted once in distant Dolomite hills, carried here in humble foundation stones, has come to recognize her not as a newcomer, but as part of the land's long, continuous story, the latest voice in a conversation that began centuries before her arrival. Have you ever pondered what it truly means to prepare to pass something sacred onward, not land alone, not livestock alone, but a quiet relationship with the earth itself, one that asks only for gentle attention and offers in return a profound sense of being held, seen, and remembered by something far older than any of us. And when a young woman arrives one autumn day, perhaps the great niece who spent childhood summers here, now grown and drawn back by roots she cannot fully name, might watch with quiet knowing as the newcomer's questions begin exactly where her own once did, noticing the animals' perfect stillness, asking about the faint warmth near the corner, flipping through the old journal with widening eyes. Could there come a twilight evening, soft and gold, when takes the young woman's hand and leads her to the worn bench just inside the barn door, inviting her to sit and simply be present as the hour approaches, not explaining, not warning, only sharing the silence until the animals turn in unison and the vast sky deepens above them. What gentle smile might touch face as she feels, in that shared moment, the guardian's patient acknowledgement ripple through the air like the faintest breath, recognizing that the circle remains unbroken, that the displaced spirit of sacred stone and ancient hill has found yet another willing heart to include in its timeless watch, and in the quiet certainty of her final seasons, as the plains prepare to receive her back into their wide embrace, might rest at last in the deepest peace of all, that she has not merely kept the land, but has been kept by it, woven gently into the same benevolent gaze that has watched over these grasslands since long before human footsteps first marked the dust, and will continue long after, under the immense and eternal Texas sky. What might softly begin to happen as final winter settles over the rolling plains, when the northerlies carry a sharper bite, and the grasslands lie quiet under a thin frost that glints like scattered stars in the early light. And she knows, without sorrow, that her time as caretaker is gently drawing to a close. Can you feel how the young woman, let us call her, who has come to stay through these cold months watches with quiet attention, learning not just the practical rhythms of feeding and mending fences, but the deeper ones, the way pauses at the barn door each dawn, the soft greeting she offers to the stillness, the unhurried manner in which she joins the animals, vigil as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Have you ever wondered what passes between two people when words are no longer needed? When a simple glance toward the northeast corner, a shared breath in the cool air, a gentle nod as the hour approaches conveys more than any explanation ever could, allowing the land itself to become the teacher. And when, on a rare mild afternoon, leads to the foundation stones and invites her to lay a hand upon the pale dolomite, still faintly warm despite the winter chill, might sense for the first time the slow, steady pulse that seems to rise from deep within the earth, a reminder that what dwells here was never confined to human understanding, but has always been the living memory of the plains themselves. Could there come a quiet evening by the fireplace, the wind whispering outside, when speaks not of spirits or mysteries, but simply of respect? How the Comanche once climbed distant hills to listen, how the land asks only that we notice, that we stay long enough to feel its patience, and that every caretaker before her learned the same gentle truth in their own time. What tender certainty might fill the barn on last morning, as she walks there one final time with beside her, the animals turning in unison as always, and feels the guardian's ancient acknowledgement settle over them, both not as farewell, but as welcome extended to the next keeper, completing yet another turn in the endless circle. And as breath grows softer in the days that follow, and the vast Texas sky holds its eternal watch above the weathered barn, might we not all come to understand, in our own quiet way, that nothing truly ends here, that the benevolent presence carried in stone and soil and memory simply waits, patient as the turning seasons, for every new heart willing to pause, to listen, and to join the timeless stillness that has always been the land's gentle way of saying, "You are home." What might quietly linger in the days following's passing, as spring once again softens the rolling plains with tender green, and the wildflowers begin their ancient dance across the grasslands. And now the sole caretaker walks the familiar path to the barn each morning with a heart both heavy and strangely light. Can you sense how the animals greet her with the same serene attention they once offered, turning in unison at the appointed hour as though nothing has changed? Yet everything has reminding her gently that the vigil belongs not to any one person, but to the land itself, and to all who choose to stand within its patient embrace. Have you ever wondered what it truly feels like to step fully into a role that was never forced upon you, but slowly, steadily claimed you to wake one dawn, and realize that the questions you carried upon arrival have dissolved, not into answers spoken aloud, but into a quiet knowing that lives in the breath, in the touch of wind, in the faint warmth rising from ancient dolomite stones, and when, in the soft twilight of a late spring evening, places her hand once more upon those foundation stones, and feels the same slow pulse once described, not as something separate or supernatural, but as the living heartbeat of the plains themselves. Might she understand at last that the guardian spirit was never waiting to be discovered, only waiting to be remembered? Could there come a moment, perhaps under a vast summer sky ablaze with stars, when sits alone on the old bench and feels presence not as absence, but as continuation, joined with all the caretakers who came before and all who will come after, woven into the same timeless thread that stretches from Comanche healers climbing sacred hills to this quiet corner where displaced stone still holds its gentle watch. What deep peace might settle over her then, as another season turns and the cicadas sing their endless song, knowing that the land does not grieve as we do, but simply holds, holding every story, every life, every quiet offering in its benevolent, unhurried memory. And might we not all, in our own way, come to see that the true inheritance of such a place is not the barn, nor the cattle, nor even the wide acres beneath the Texas sky, but the gentle invitation to pause, to listen, and to join a stillness so vast and kind that it makes room for every heart willing to rest within it. What might slowly begin to reveal itself too, as the summers and winters continue their eternal dance across the rolling plains. When she finds herself walking the same paths once trod, her hands growing calloused in the same ways, her eyes learning to read the sky with the same quiet patience that once belonged to those who came before her. Can you sense how the vigil in the barn becomes not a ritual observed, but a rhythm lived? How no longer notes the hour in a journal, but feels it arrive in her bones, in the subtle shift of light through the weathered boards, in the soft collective breath of the animals as they turn together toward the corner that has never been empty. Have you ever wondered what it truly means to carry forward a knowing that was never taught in words, to wake one morning and realize that the faint warmth rising from the dolomite stones is no longer a mystery to be pondered, but a greeting as familiar as the sunrise, a gentle reminder that the land has chosen to include you in its long memory. And when, years into her solitary tending, begins to notice how storms part gently around the barn, how wildflowers bloom in perfect circles that leave the foundation stones untouched, how dreams of vast grasslands and distant conical hills visit her with increasing clarity, might she come to understand that these are not signs to be interpreted, but conversations to be joined. Could there come a quiet autumn evening as the grasses turn gold and the wind carries the dry scent of mesquite, when sits on the old bench and feels the presence not as something separate watching her, but as the land itself breathing with her, holding her, as it held the unnamed narrator before, as it held Comanche healers long ago, who climbed sacred hills to listen. What deeper belonging might settle over her then, as another generation of calves is born already knowing where to turn their gaze, knowing that the guardian spirit, displaced yet enduring, benevolent yet patient, asks nothing more than presence, and offers in return the profound gift of being fully seen by something ancient and kind, and might, in the gentle turning of yet another season beneath this immense Texas sky, finally rest in the quiet truth that has awaited every caretaker who stayed long enough, that we do not watch the land alone. The land watches with us, holds us, remembers us, and in its timeless stillness whispers the same eternal invitation. You have always belonged here. What might gradually deepen in as the decades unfold across these timeless rolling plains, when her own hair begins to silver like the weathered barn boards, and she finds herself moving through the days with the same unhurried grace that once embodied, her hands knowing every gate latch and feed measure by heart, her eyes tracing the horizon with a gaze that has learned to see far beyond the visible. Can you imagine how the vigil evolves into something even more subtle over time? Not a turning of heads alone, but a shared stillness that seems to encompass the entire ranch, where even the wind appears to soften as it passes the barn, where storms drift gently aside, and where the wild grasses grow thicker and greener in patterns that echo ancient circles once walked by those who honored the land long before any of us. Have you ever reflected on what it means to become not just a caretaker, but a quiet conduit to carry forward the gentle teachings of the earth without ever needing to speak them aloud, trusting that those who come after will discover the same truths in their own season, drawn by the same patient invitation that has endured through generations? And when a new face appears one day, perhaps a young person seeking refuge from the hurried world beyond the gravel road, arriving with questions and restlessness in equal measure, might simply offer a quiet smile and invite them to sit on the old bench at the appointed hour, allowing the animals, the warmth from the dolomite stones, and the vast sky itself to begin the slow, kind process of teaching once more. Could there come a moment, in the soft glow of yet another twilight, when feels the guardian spirit not as something separate or distant, but as the living essence of the plains, woven through every blade of grass, every breath of wind, every quiet heartbeat shared in the barn, recognizing that its benevolence has never wavered, only waited for each new keeper to grow still enough to feel its embrace? What profound serenity might envelop her then, as another cycle of seasons prepares to turn beneath this eternal Texas sky, knowing that the land's memory holds her gently as it held the unnamed ones before, and as it will hold all who follow, forever patient, forever kind, forever whispering the same timeless truth to every open heart. You are seen, you are remembered, and you have always been part of this vast and gentle watch. What might begin to creep into awareness as the decades deepen on these isolated rolling plains, when the solitude stretches longer than any human voice has broken it in years, and the vigil in the barn, no longer a gentle rhythm, but an unyielding demand, begins to claim more than mere attention. Can you sense how the stillness, once comforting, starts to feel heavier with each passing season, as though the air near the corner thickens imperceptibly, pressing against the chest like a held breath that refuses to release, while the animals no longer turn away at dusk, but maintain their frozen gaze through the night, eyes reflecting lantern light without a single blink. Have you ever wondered what happens when the offerings once left with reverence, a sprig of cedar, a handful of native grass, begin to wither unnaturally fast near the dolomite stones, curling black at the edges within hours, while everything else on the ranch thrives under rain and sun alike, and And when dreams of vast grasslands and distant conical hills shift from whispers of guidance to something colder, visions of endless watching, of eyes that do not belong to bison or Comanche healers, but to something older, patient, and deeply aware that has waited beneath the plains since before any life walked them. What quiet dread might stir in the waking hours, making the vast sky feel less like freedom and more like an unblinking lid pressed down upon the earth? Could the horror deepen on those rare nights when a norther blows fierce and cold, rattling the barn boards, yet inside the air grows oppressively still and warm near the corner, warm as living breath, while finds her own feet carrying her there unbidden, drawn to stand among the animals until dawn, gaze locked forward, unable to turn away even as exhaustion claws at her mind. What slow realization might settle like frost in her bones when she notices that the newborn calves no longer bleat or wobble toward their mothers, but rise silently, already fixed in the vigil, and that over years the herd has grown quieter overall. No playful butts from goats, no restless pawing from horses, only that perfect, shared attention toward the corner where the dust now lies smoother than glass, untouched by wind or hoof, and in the deepest solitude, when no visitor has come for seasons uncounted, and the gravel road shows no tire tracks but her own, might begin to feel that the guardian spirit she once believed benevolent has revealed another face, not cruel, not vengeful, but utterly indifferent to human notions of kindness, a vast and ancient awareness that does not include her in its watch, but slowly, patiently absorbs her into it, erasing the boundary between watcher and watched, until even the thought of leaving becomes unthinkable. What final, quiet terror might take root when she catches her reflection in the dark barn window one moonless night and sees, for just a moment, that her own eyes no longer blink in rhythm with her thoughts, but hold steady, unyielding, fixed upon the corner, alongside every other living thing, as though the land's timeless gaze has finally claimed its vessel, and the vast Texas sky above watches without mercy, as another caretaker becomes forever part of what waits patiently in the silence, what might begin to unravel in its mind as the isolation stretches into decades, unbroken by any human voice beyond her own, when the gravel road remains overgrown with prairie grass, and the nearest town becomes little more than a faded memory, and she realizes that she has not left the ranch boundaries in years, not from choice, but because the very thought of turning away from the barn feels like tearing breath from her lungs. Can you sense how the warmth from the dolomite stones, once faintly comforting, now radiates with an intensity that scorches the air on even the coldest nights, driving frost from the ground in a perfect circle around the corner, while the rest of the plains lie white and silent under winter's grip? Have you ever contemplated what happens when the animals cease to age in the way they should, when cows and horses that should have been culled long ago stand with coats still glossy, eyes still fixed, bodies unmoving in their endless vigil, as though time itself has pooled and stagnated in that northeast corner, refusing to carry them forward. And when, gazing into a cracked hand mirror one dawn, notices that her own reflection has begun to lag ever so slightly, lips moving a fraction after she speaks, eyes blinking moments too late, what cold realization might coil in her gut, whispering that the guardian's gaze is no longer content to watch from afar, but has begun to claim the watchers themselves, freezing them gently, inexorably, into its own timeless stasis. Could the horror deepen on those rare occasions when a lost traveler's vehicle appears on the distant horizon, dust plume rising like a desperate signal, only to watch the truck slow, turn inexplicably onto the gravel road, and then, hours later, find no trace of it. No tire tracks beyond the gate, no sign that anyone ever arrived, while the vigil in the barn continues undisturbed. What slow, suffocating dread might take hold when awakens one morning, to find that her own feet have carried her through the night to stand among the animals, body rigid in the same unblinking pose. And though her mind screams to move, to flee, to run, the body remains obedient only to the silent command rising from the stones, patient, ancient, and utterly without mercy. And in the final, quiet erosion of self, as the vast Texas sky wheels overhead season after season with indifferent brilliance, might come to understand that the presence in the corner was never a guardian at all, not benevolent, not displaced spirit of sacred hills, but something far older, far colder, that has waited beneath these plains since the dolomite itself cooled from molten earth, absorbing every life that paused too long within its reach, weaving them into an eternal, unblinking watch that does not end with death, but simply continues. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Thank you.